President Hichilema reveals his 30-year marriage secret: "I've never laid hands on my wife." When a sitting president makes a deeply personal statement about his marriage, it's never just personal, it's political, cultural, and symbolic. President Hakainde Hichilema has declared that in over 30 years of marriage, he has never laid hands on his wife. Why did he feel compelled to say this now? What allegations or narratives is he responding to? And how does this statement intersect with leadership, masculinity, and the fight against gender-based violence in Zambia? Tonight, we examine the context, the reactions, and the wider implications of a statement that has stirred national conversation. Good day, viewers. Welcome to another edition of InspirAfrica Official. I'm Nakash. Well, what a week it's been across the continent. We've seen developments from Cape Town to Cairo, but today we bring you something quite different. Something that speaks not to scandal, but to strength. Not to controversy, but to character. Our lead story, a presidential confession that's breaking the internet and warming hearts across Africa. Picture this, a packed auditorium in Lusaka. Cameras rolling. Journalists leaning forward. The president of Zambia stands at the podium, and in a moment of raw vulnerability, he opens a window into the most private chamber of his life, his marriage. For 30 years, he's walked beside one woman. Through political storms and personal trials. Through the climb to power and the weight of leadership. And now, he reveals something that has left an entire nation stunned. What does it take for a man to honor one woman for 3 decades in a world where power corrupts relationships? What kind of discipline, what kind of love, what kind of conviction drives a leader to draw a line he refuses to cross, no matter the provocation, no matter the frustration? In an age where domestic violence statistics paint a grim picture across our continent, where behind closed doors, too many women suffer in silence, what does it mean when a sitting president declares before the world, "I have never laid hands on my wife"? Is this political posturing? Is this the calculated move of a savvy politician seeking approval? Or are we witnessing something far more profound? A man willing to be vulnerable about his values, even when vulnerability is mistaken for weakness? And perhaps most importantly, what can a nation learn when its leader models restraint, respect, and unwavering commitment? The revelation has sparked a continental conversation. The question on everyone's lips is simple but profound: can power and gentleness coexist in the same man? Factual foundation, background and timeline. The revelation came to light during a national dialogue on family values and domestic stability, held at the Mulungushi International Conference Center in Lusaka on December 10, 2025. President Hakainde Hichilema, now 62 years old, has been married to his wife, Mutinta Hichilema, for over 30 years. Their union, which began in the early 1990s, has weathered the tumultuous journey of Zambian politics. 5 failed presidential bids, 15 years in opposition, allegations, court cases, and even a brief imprisonment in 2017 on disputed treason charges. The event was originally scheduled as a routine policy address focusing on the government's national gender-based violence prevention strategy. Cabinet ministers, civil society leaders, traditional chiefs, and members of the diplomatic corps filled the auditorium. The First Lady herself was present, seated in the front row, unaware that her husband was about to make headlines for reasons no political analyst had anticipated. The speech began conventionally enough. President Hichilema outlined statistics, the disturbing prevalence of domestic violence in Zambia, where studies show approximately 1 in 3 women experience physical violence from intimate partners. He discussed legislative reforms, funding for women's shelters, and training programs for law enforcement. Then came the pivot. Around 23 minutes into his address, the president paused. He set down his prepared notes. What happened next was unscripted, a departure from the official text that would soon trend across every social media platform on the continent. He looked directly at the audience and said something that would become the most shared quote of the week. "Before I ask others to change, I must speak my truth." What followed was a deeply personal testimony about his marriage, his struggles, his moments of anger and frustration, and most remarkably, his unwavering commitment to a principle that has defined his relationship with his wife for 3 decades. Direct evidence. President Hichilema's voice, captured on video that has now garnered over 5 million views, carried a weight of emotion as he shared his story. "You know, I stand before you today not just as your president, but as a husband. A husband of 30 years. And I want to tell you something that I've never really spoken about publicly before." He paused, glancing briefly at the First Lady. "Marriage is hard. Let me be honest with you. Marriage is hard work. There have been days, many days, when Mutinta and I have disagreed. Days when I've been frustrated, angry even. Days when the pressures of politics, the weight of opposition, the sting of defeat, it all came home with me. And in those moments, in those heated moments, I had a choice." Another pause. The room had gone completely silent. "I made a decision early in our marriage, a decision that I have never broken, and with God's grace, I never will. I decided that no matter what happens, no matter how angry I become, no matter how heated our disagreements, I will never, ever lay my hands on my wife. Not once. Not ever." The auditorium erupted in applause, but the president raised his hand, signaling he wasn't finished. Please. I'm not saying this to receive praise. I'm saying this because it needs to be said. It needs to be said that real strength is not in domination. Real manhood is not proven through violence. Real leadership starts at home, in how we treat the people we claim to love. A journalist from the Zambia Daily Mail later asked during the press briefing, "Mr. President, some might say this is a low bar, that simply not being violent shouldn't be celebrated. How do you respond?" President Hichilema nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. It is a low bar. And that's the tragedy, isn't it? That we live in a society where not beating your wife is considered exceptional. But until we change that reality, until every man makes this commitment, I will continue to speak about it. Because silence is complicity." The First Lady, Mutinta Hichilema, who rarely gives interviews, spoke briefly to the Times of Zambia the following day. "Hakainde is not perfect. No husband is. But what he said is true. In 30 years, through all our struggles, and we've had many, he has never raised his hand to me. That is not a small thing. That is everything. And I pray that other men will hear his words and understand that true strength lies in restraint, in respect, in choosing love over anger every single day." Traditional Chief Chipipo of the Bemba people, who attended the event, offered this perspective. "The president has reminded us of the values our ancestors held sacred. A chief who cannot govern his own household cannot govern his people. But to govern is not to rule with fear or force, it is to lead with wisdom and honor. This is what Umuntha demands. This is what being fully human means." Deeper analysis, implications and reactions. The president's revelation has ignited a national and indeed continental conversation about masculinity, power, and domestic relationships in modern Africa. Dr. Charity Muzamba, a gender studies professor at the University of Zambia, offers this analysis. What President Hichilema has done is profoundly radical, even if it doesn't seem so on the surface. In a patriarchal society where violence against women is normalized, where men are taught that authority must be enforced physically, his public commitment to non-violence challenges centuries of toxic conditioning. This is not virtue signaling, this is modeling. The political opposition has largely been measured in their response. Patricia Kamboli, spokesperson for the United Party for National Development's political rivals, released a statement acknowledging the importance of the conversation while challenging the government to match words with policy action. "We commend the president for his personal testimony. Now we need to see accelerated implementation of gender-based violence prevention programs, increased funding for survivors' services, and harsher penalties for perpetrators." Personal virtue must translate into national transformation. Across social media, the response has been overwhelmingly positive, though not without complexity. The hashtag 30 years strong trended for 3 consecutive days. Young men, in particular, have been sharing their own commitments to non-violence, with some creating video testimonies pledging to uphold the same standard in their relationships. However, some critics, primarily international commentators, have questioned whether the president's statement inadvertently centers male virtue in a conversation that should focus on women's experiences. Feminist scholar Dr. Nandi Moyle from South Africa writes, "While I appreciate the president's transparency, we must be careful not to celebrate men for simply meeting the baseline of human decency. The bar cannot be 'I didn't hit my wife.' The bar must be active partnership, shared labor, economic equity, and dismantling of patriarchal structures." Legal experts point to the unresolved gaps in Zambian domestic violence legislation. Lawyer Sarah Longwe notes, "The president's personal example is inspiring, but Zambia still lacks comprehensive domestic violence legislation with enforceable protection orders and adequate support systems." The Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act of 2011 was a start, but implementation remains weak, particularly in rural areas. Religious leaders across denominations have embraced the president's message. Bishop Joshua Banda of the Evangelical Fellowship of Zambia stated, "This is biblical manhood. Ephesians commands husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church. Christ never coerced, never dominated through fear. President Hichilema is showing what it means to lead as Christ led. Through sacrifice, service, and self-control." The broader question remains, can one man's testimony shift cultural norms? Historical precedent suggests yes, when leaders model behavior publicly, particularly in societies with strong respect for authority, it can catalyze social change. But experts caution that lasting transformation requires systemic intervention, education reform, economic empowerment of women, judicial accountability, and sustained public awareness campaigns. Perhaps most significantly, the president's revelation has opened space for men to speak openly about their struggles with anger, their journeys toward emotional maturity, and their commitments to breaking cycles of violence. In a region where men rarely discuss vulnerability, this conversation represents a meaningful cultural shift. Thank you so much for watching today's edition of InspirAfrica Official. This story, President Hichilema's 30-year commitment, is more than political news. It's a reminder that leadership begins in the small, unseen choices we make every day. In how we treat those we claim to love. In whether our private character matches our public persona. We want to hear from you. What do you think about the president's revelation? Does personal virtue matter in political leadership? What would it take for this conversation to translate into real change in our communities? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this dialogue going. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories that matter, more conversations that challenge us, and more reasons to believe that Africa's best days are still ahead. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. This is Nakash, reminding you, true strength is measured not by the power we wield, but by the restraint we choose.